Sir, when are the grades for the midterm going to be out?
I'm sorry, I don't know that. Soon, I thought, but okay. All right, everyone. We're going to continue what we were doing last time. As I said, I don't really know when the grades are going to be out. I'm sorry about that. So the program for today is almost finished chapter 8. Again, what's in the chapter itself in terms of slides is somehow interesting, but the most interesting part is in the appendix with no slides. So I'm just going to do my own version of the appendix, and I invite you to read it too. It's quite detailed and long. So I don't know about how much of the extra exercises are going to be in the about stuff in the appendix, but most probably you're going to get some questions in the final about the appendix, like it was for chapter 6. Okay, so let me share my screen. So here we were last time, and we discussed that if the firm wants to produce with an optimal combination of two factors, then this has to be the case, that the real marginal product of each factor have to be equal. What do I mean by the real marginal product? It's the marginal product divided by its price. So anytime in economics we talk about real variable, like I don't know, real GDP, or yeah. So what we say is the quantity produced in monetary value divided by its price. So you get something like some measure of the actual quantity and not the monetary value. So here it would be, for instance, marginal product of capital divided by the price of capital, or marginal product of labor divided by the price of labor. Or the other way around, if you multiply by PK on both sides and divide by MPL on both sides, then you get MPK divided by MPL equals PK divided by PL. So what an additional worker or rather additional piece of capital gives me in terms of production divided by what an additional worker gives me has to be equal to the price of that capital divided by the price of that labor. And of course, what is PK? What is PL? Somebody has an idea?
The average?
The what?
The average? No.
PK? No, I'm saying what does the price of capital represent and what does the price of labor represent?
The monetary value associated with the variables at certain levels?
Yes, so what do you have to pay to get an extra unit of capital? Well, this actually is not all that clear, but we've talked briefly about it, is the rental rate. So how much you have to pay to, it could be to borrow to the bank or to pay to the company who rents you some machine. So we say the rental rate. And here, what is the price of labor? What's how much does it cost me to get some extra worker?
Their wage.
Yes, do you? So this is a PKPL is an abstract. It could be anything, but we know in reality it's the rental rate for the machines and the wage rate for the workers. Right. Let me put some line there. Okay. And in here, I give you some example of it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would the other costs be included, like for example, for machines, would fuel be included, or and for labor, would employee benefits be included in this calculation?
Yeah, it definitely is everything that you have to pay to operate it. Yeah, for workers, definitely that's part of it. For the machine, so depends. If you you think, okay, my bundle is the machine plus the electricity or the fuel, yes. But sometimes we think of this as separate things. So price of electricity is some other input because it has its own determinants too. So yeah, it's determined by hydrochloric or by OPEC policy on oil, for instance. But good question. Okay, so we're here. So what we were saying, though, so this is just saying the same thing, but in different words. So whatever the ratio of marginal product of each factor is not equal for all factor, there are possibilities for factor substitution to reduce the costs. So for instance, if the price of capital or rent becomes much lower, then it's better to increase the number of machines I use to produce. This will increase the marginal. This will. If the rent is lower, then it will. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I had higher in my head. So if the rent is lower, then I should use more machines. And if I increase the number of machines, then it's going to decrease their marginal productivity because I am going to add a bunch of them. So in the end, I have a bigger number of machines compared to the number of workers. Yeah, so there's always this trade-off, and I have to make sure that the productivity is the same for both. The reproductivity is the same for both factors. So of course, the firms they react by changing their inputs of productive factors. So question, just to see if you remember which chapter it is. So for instance, if McDonald's or any other, you put your favorite fast food chain there, employees ask for a better range. What should McDonald's do? Or I would say ask and receive. Any idea?
Increase their productivity. So that they can earn more money to make the increase in wage.
So yes. So what you're saying is train them better, for instance. So in a sense, what you're saying is replace poorly trained. Employees with higher skilled to justify the wage increase. So that makes sense. But in terms of the trade-off between employees and machines,
you could lower your rent expense that's associated to getting new equipment because you've already increased your productivity by getting new people into the business.
Oh, you're coming with very specific I thought you would. Okay. So you're
We
saying
should just use more.
the what?
We should just use more machines.
Yes, yes, that's what I had in mind. Yes, so use more machines. Oops. Sorry about this. Okay. But this is so in the short term or in the long term?
That would be in the long term.
Yes. And in the short term, so in the short term, so they can either do this or they don't have they can't adjust their
Professor,
yeah.
They could still adjust their production relatively quickly if they just change something in their staff.
Yeah, so that's a bit what we're saying here. So what you could say is, okay, so if you're going to get paid more, then I'm going to hire fewer workers maybe, but make sure that they're extremely productive. And you see that these go hand in hand. So in a way, what I could say is, okay, I'm going to, instead of having poorly trained workers that just flip burgers very inefficiently, I'm going to have somebody who operates machines to flip burger very fast, and then train them well. So they're going to be productive and they're going to use machines to make themselves productive. So these go hand in hand. All right, so that is it. So this is just so yeah, this is just saying the same thing. So methods of production change when the relative price factors change. Relatively more, yeah. Oh yeah, well, just one comment about what we're saying. So why did I write this? Because to remind ourselves that we're specifically in chapter 8 in the long run. So that's when we are able to adjust these, to make these long-term adjustments, like use more machines, for instance. Yeah, so principle of substitution is that the methods of production change when the relative prices change. So this is also saying the same thing. All right, so now we can see long cost curves. So here, so we are just describing what it is, but we're going to show it a few slides later. So when all factors of production can vary, then there's at least cost method of producing any given level of output using any combination of output. So what you can say is, okay, so I'm planning my 10 years plan ahead of for my firm. I'm going to produce 1,000 hamburgers per day. So what is the optimal value I should use in terms of machines and employees? If I'm planning 1,500, or if I'm planning 800, then I'm going to again adjust both machines and employees to have this optimal combination and this lower cost curve. So what you get is the lower cost possible for each production I would like to have. And this is what we're going to call the long run average cost curve. Yeah. Yeah, so I prefer to show it to you right away, so you get a more intuitive sense of what's going on. Yeah, so here it is. So here's the output per period. So this is my long-term plan. if I decide to produce, say, 1,000 hamburgers or 1,500 or 500 hamburgers, then in the long run, this is what it's going to cost me. It's going to be the long run average cost curve. So this is it. And now imagine I've chosen to produce this quantity there. Or yeah, so this is, for instance, if I have 1 machine, 2 machine, 3 machine, 4 machine, 5 machines, for instance. So if I have chosen to produce, let's say here, for instance, then it means that probably I have bought 3 machines, and then I've chosen to, yeah, no, so yeah, this might not be exactly the right thing. So I would be here exactly, because you have an infinite quantity. This looks like you have yeah, you can choose between 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, but in the end, you can choose whatever fraction of capital you want. And if I'm here, so it means that I would have decided to produce exactly here. That's the optimal long-term optimal long-term value of my output to be at the lowest point on my long-run average cost curve. And then if all of a sudden something happens in the short run, so what does that mean? It means that I cannot move on this long-run average cost curve, because there's only one factor in the short run I can change, is my short run my variable factors, such as labor or how hours of work. So then if I have decided to produce here at the long run, then what is the cost curve I'm facing in the short run? It's this short run average cost curve here. So it means that I'm essentially stuck, and if I want to reduce in the short run my production, I cannot do it by a lot, with getting a lot of getting yeah, a lot of efficiency out of it, because I'm stuck with a big quantity of capital. So you see that I'm going to be stuck on this short run curve. The only thing I can do is decide, oh, I really want to in the next 10 years change my my production. So then I'm going to change my capital and labor composition and be, for instance, here. But you see that in the short run, I'm stuck there. And so all these short run average cost curve are going to define my long run average cost curve. All right.
So,
Yeah.
sir, like those mini curves on top of the big one, those are kind of like the costs of those machines.
It reflects the fact that if I want to change my production in the short run, I cannot gain a lot of savings out of it. So, for instance, if I've decided to be at the curve number 3 here, then it means that imagine I have 3 machines. And now I decide, oh, I want to produce a nut. Here, I am going to put number, it's going to be easier. So imagine that I have decided to produce 1,000 per day. And then I would like to decide, oh, I think in the end, maybe there's something, so the market isn't that good and I cannot sell as many hamburgers as I thought. So I would like to not produce 1,000, but I would like to produce only 700, for instance. So I would like to produce here. So would I be able to make a lot of savings in the short run? No, because I'm stuck with a big restaurant that was meant to produce 1,000 hamburgers. So it means that in the short run, I'm going to be stuck on this short run average cost curve. So what's the T there? SRAT. Yeah, it's the short run average cost curve, but I'm just curious what the T is. I forgot. They don't write it, unfortunately. Anyway, so that's the short run curve. So what happens? Well, it's not written there, but so I'm going to be stuck on that curve. And you see that probably my cost per unit is going to be very high of producing this in the short run. Why? Because I still have to pay all these machines that I'm not going to use. Same thing if I realize that the market is really good and I would like to produce, say, 1,200 hamburgers. Well, in the short run, I cannot adjust very easily. So I'm again stuck on this curve there. And then the question is, what could I do if I decide that in the next 5 years, I really am going to produce 1,200 hamburgers per day? Then I can change not only the number of workers, but the number of machines too. So rather than stick with the machines that I was using to produce 1,000 and hire many extra employees, I'm going to increase the number of machines and employees in the right proportions, and I'm going to get to this new short-run average cost curve. But that's going to get me the best cost on the long-run average cost curve. Does that make sense? There's a lot going on there. So really the long run average cost curve is what is the lowest cost I can achieve by adjusting all my factors. But in the short run, whatever choice I've made in terms of volume of production, then I'm bound by this choice. And now all I can do is adjust my short run factor, which would be labor in that case, for instance. And I cannot, it's not easy for me to change anything because I'm stuck with the restaurant I have. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So there's a lot going on in this this curve there. There's this tension between the short run and the long run. So that's why what I wanted to say. So when I ask you this, so what would I do, for instance, if the wage rate increases? Then I would decide to use more machines and less worker. But in the long run, in the short run, I cannot change all that much. All right.
I have a question about the curve. You said that if we start at 1,000 and we go to 700, we will still, like, it won't benefit us because we will still be stuck on
this short run. Yeah.
Yeah. So there will be like too much big restaurant with too much machines for less production. But what happens if we go like high, like 1,200? Like there won't be enough place for all the quantity produced.
Oh, it's so imagine that I have, so I don't know. I'm still going to imagine I have 3 machines, and the optimal number of employees per machine is 2, for instance. So in my restaurant, to produce 1,000, I've decided I have 3 machines and 6 employees. And now I changed my mind. I realized that so many people are coming in the restaurants, and 1,000 is not the right production volume. It should be 1,200. What can I do? Well, I would really like to not have 3 machines, but 4 machines and 2 other employees. But I cannot do that in the short run because I cannot order a machine and put it right away today. So what I have to do is say, okay, I have 3 machines, and rather than have an extra machine and 2 extra employees, I'm going to have the same number of machines and 5 extra employees to get to 1,200. But you see that it's going to be very inefficient because these extra employees are going to maybe make hamburgers by hand instead of using a machine, and it's going to cost me a lot of money. So that's why it's not easy to either reduce in the short run or increase in the short run, because I'm stuck with the capital I have or the long run factor I have. But then if I realize that, yeah, the real number of people who come to the restaurant every day allow me to sell 1,200 every day, then I'm going to, in the long run, order this machine. And rather than be here, then when the machine arrives, I can fire those 3 extra employees and replace them with the machine and be there. All right. So I'm going to be happy with this choice. Now so we're going to stick with this curve, but continue later. Yeah. So what's happening? So I'm going to just discuss this long run average cost curve here. So why does it have the shape it does here? Because there are, as always, assumptions behind what we're saying. So what are the assumptions? Well, first of all, we assume that it's decreasing here. And what does that reflect? It reflects economies of scale. So it's in this area there. What does that mean? It means that the optimal size of any restaurant is not to produce, say, 100 hamburgers. It's closer to 1,000 hamburgers. And if I increase the size of the restaurant, I'm going to decrease the average cost for me to produce my production. So this is what happens there. And what happens here is, oh, well, actually, they talk about it later in the next slide. So I'm just not going to put it there. But yeah, so this is what it's reflecting is the fact that I'm becoming more and more efficient if I increase the size of my firm. And the best size of the restaurant, quote unquote, would be to produce, say, 1,000. Right? Yeah, so what we're saying there is, yeah, economies of scale gives me from 0 to QM increasing returns. So QM would be here. So here we see that we have increasing returns to scale. So it's the best possible. So if I'm there, I should increase the size of restaurant, or at least if I do, I'm going to produce everything more efficiently. All right. And then yeah, this is again situation in which output increases more than in proportion to input as production increases, so that we're always talking about this this section there. Yeah, and QM is the minimum efficient scale. So that's here. So that's the best place to be to. So that's the combination of machines and labor that allows me to produce as much or as efficiently as possible. So at the lowest cost possible. So yeah, so they put a lot of slides to say relatively the same thing. Yeah. So yeah, again, that's here. Minimum efficient scale is the smallest output at which lowest LRAC reaches its minimum. So economies of scale has been realized. So yeah, it's at QM. I can put QM again here. Okay, and at QM, the firm experiences constant returns. So I can put QM here again.
I have a question. The cost per unit is the cost of production.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So why do we see it's constant return? Because what happens here is if I increase my output, then the cost per unit stays constant. So yeah, so it means if firm increases its output, the cost per unit stays constant. So this, yeah, this essentially means that I could at that point produce say 100 more, and the cost of this 100. So yeah, if for instance it cost me, yeah, example, produce 1,000, cost 100, then produce 1,100, and the cost is, what would be the cost?
$110.
Yes, 110. So cost per unit is 10, and here cost per unit would be 1,100 divided, would again be 10.
But sir, does that mean
Oh,
that
it's not, sorry, it's not 10. Oh yeah, it's 10, sorry, yes, okay, fine. No, yeah, yeah. Let's revert these. So produce, so it's 100 divided by 1,000. So it's 0.1. Yeah, I thought there was something fishy about what I was writing. All right, so that's 0.1 again. Sorry, go ahead with your question.
oh yeah, I meant since we're increasing the output, we're moving along the long run curve,
Yes.
right? So is that why the cost is going up a little bit if we're moving up?
Yes, so if I increase my output, of course, the cost of production increases because I need to have more machines, hire more people. But the cost per extra unit is constant at that point.
Okay, and that means let's say we want to increase 100 in the short term. That means we have to go up that short term number 3, right?
Oh yeah, so here we're just talking purely long term. But you see that in that small zone, it would be the same. So okay, this is getting. Thing is, it's just this small zone of the curve, right? So as soon as I end up like here, it starts increasing. As soon as I end up here for the short run, it starts increasing too. So it's just exactly here that this is the case. Yeah, so we're getting into derivative territories and math, so I don't want to put too much on that. But was that your question a bit? That the same phenomenon happens for the short run curve as well?
Well, because it's confusing because let's say we're staying at QM and constant returns. For me, it doesn't make sense. Like we're increasing production, but you're saying we're staying at the same place.
Okay, yeah. So imagine that I start from there and I end up here. So imagine I produce 990. So it's going to be 90 divided by 900. So if I start here and then I end up here, right? So it's about the same. So I agree with you that it's right around this, and as soon as I continue to increase, then it's not going to be true anymore. Yeah. So. Okay, here, so this is 0.1, for example, and here I'm at 900, and here I'm at 1,100. All right, so you see that I was at 900, the cost per unit was 0.1, and if I increase to 1,100, so I just cross QM, but I stay around it, then the cost per unit stays roughly 0.1. Because now I produce 1,100 and the cost is 110. But I agree with you that if I continue to increase, then it's no longer the case. So that's what I'm going to talk about.
So the constant return is only around QM.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Say that again.
The constant return is only when it's close to QM.
Yes, exactly. Yes, but this is because of the shape of that long run average curve. So we think we're describing something that is true for many firms, the fact that there is a optimal size to the firm. And in that case, yes, exactly. Since it has this shape, that's like a parabolic shape, an inverted U shape or a saucer shape, then it's only going to be true here. But if it was always possible to say double the size of the firm and stay at the same cost per unit, then this long run average curve would be essentially flat everywhere. So it's but here we say that it's it's only flat around this QM there. And I'm going to say a bit more about why we say that eventually you stop having constant returns. So that's the same, saying the same thing in the situation in which the output increases in proportion to input. So yeah. So yeah, some other thing I could add there is, so yeah, no, I'm not going to.
Professor,
Yeah, go ahead.
I might be confused. Might be mistaken the concept, but is that related to the law of diminishing returns?
Yes. Well, the law of diminishing returns is expressed by these short run curves there. Okay, yeah, that's the thing. There are many underlying aspects to it, but it's especially true for the short run curves. What this means is if in the short run, I'm stuck here basically for the number of quantity of capital, and if I decide to increase my production by a lot, but I cannot increase the number of machines, then all I can do is pile up many workers, but exactly as you're saying, they have diminishing returns to increasing the number of workers. So that's why if I try to increase my production too much, then the cost per unit is going to skyrocket, because at some point I hire maybe 10 or 20 more workers and they don't do a lot for me. So that's why per unit of production, then the cost is going to be higher. So it really is expressed in this. So the fact that the long run average cost curve increases here is a bit more subtle, which something I would like to talk about briefly later. This I would just want to give another in which the output increases in proportion to inputs as production is increased. So imagine that I have, say, again, I'm around this place here, QM. And I start with 10 machines, 12 workers, and I produce, let's see, 100 units. And the cost, so R is 1 and wage is 1, for instance. So the cost will be 10 times 1 plus 12 times 1 equals, so that's 10 plus 12, so 22, all right? And now I say I add yeah, they would have to be in the equal proportions. So imagine I add an extra machine. I increase, yeah. So I go to 11 machines. So I increase by 10%. I increase by 10% the number of workers. So 12 plus 1.2, so that's 13.2 workers. If you imagine that you can have fractional number of workers, R equals 1, W equals 1 again, and oh yeah, and produces 10% more, so 110. And yeah, the cost would be 11 times 1 plus 13.2 times 1 equals to, so that's 23.2.
But 11 plus 13 is 24, no?
Oh yeah, sorry. 24.2, yeah. So that's basically I'm in a situation in which the output increases in proportion to inputs. So here, all my inputs, yeah, increase by 10%, increase by 10%, and production increased by 10%. So cost increased by 10%. I hope that's the case. So 22 plus, I'm just going to compute it real quick.
Yes, it is. It's fine.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that's, I didn't think I would do this example, but this is just to illustrate what we are saying by saying, so we keep the inputs in the same proportion because in the long run, I can change the number of machines and the number of workers. So if I increase both by 10%, then the production also increases by 10%. I'm at this place where I have constant returns. That's what it means. And the wages and the rent is the same. So the total cost will increase by the same proportion as the increase in my inputs. And so what is going to be, what's going to happen to the cost per unit? Well, of course, it's 24.2 divided by 110. So it's going to be exactly the same as 22 divided by 100. So it's going to be constant. I could add that. Yeah, let's be complete. Let's be absolutely exhaustive there. Okay. I'm going to put this here to be more precise. And the cost per unit, 22 divided by 100, 0.22. Here, cost per unit would be 24.2 divided by 110, which should be 0.22, hopefully. Yeah, that's the case. All right. So that's what it means to have constant returns, is I increase all my inputs by the same proportion and the cost per unit stays the same. All right. So I think it's good to have given you this example because I don't know, maybe you get this kind of questions in the labs. All right. Okay, so now this place there. Yeah, so if we go past, so let's again put back the QM. So if we produce more than QM, the firm starts experiencing decreasing returns. Why? So this is a subtle question, because imagine what you could do if I can have a firm that has a cost per unit of 0.1. Then in principle, I could take this firm and copy it exactly and build a second one exactly like the first one, just on the lot beside it, and it would be a perfect copy. What would be its cost per unit? Well, it would be exactly the same cost per unit because it would be an exact copy. So in principle, we should be able to copy a firm however many times we like and have the same cost per unit as in the first firm. So we should never experience decreasing returns. We should have constant returns. It should be possible to always have the same cost per unit. So why do we see decreasing returns? So so the only explanation is that it's the manifestation of some hidden factor which cannot be reproduced. So here the textbook doesn't talk too much about it. They just say there's decreasing returns, but I'm going to tell you, because if you ask yourselves, why is it that I have decreasing return? Why is it that some firm, as a firm, I imagine in my head that big firms like Amazon's or like big distribution centers or Walmart or big steel mills, they should always be able to produce more and more efficiently, or at least keep the same efficiency as they increase. So why is it that here I just observed that there's some size that looks to be optimal, and then there's it becomes to be less productive? So it has to be because I'm running out of something there. So what kind of explanation? So example of that. So you could imagine, so one thing that we say is the Steve Jobs effect. Why? Because Steve Jobs really liked to micromanage everybody. So he was notoriously involved in everything that Apple had to do. So if he's involved in everything, then at some point, Apple cannot be 10 times or 100 times bigger, because it would mean that he would have 10 times or 100 times more work to do to just monitor everybody's work and be sure that everybody does the right thing. So what do we say is that, well, there's some hidden factor that cannot be reproduced. Here is Steve Jobs, cannot be everywhere. So that's why at some point, Apple couldn't for instance, become have an infinite size shape, have an infinite size. All right. So that's why we may observe this kind of decreasing returns. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, so technically what is it? Well, it's a situation in which output increases less than in proportion to inputs as production increases. Yeah, so it's possible to observe this, but in practice, it's because I'm running out of something. Yeah, so this economies of scale. So the efficient scale is QM. And then if I still want to have a bigger and bigger and bigger firm, then yeah, there's something that goes wrong and I have increasing costs and decreasing returns. So that's what we see, why we see it's saucer shaped. So here there's increasing returns, efficient scale, and decreasing returns. Yes. Yeah, so this I've already talked about this. Yes.
I was wondering, why is it that on the right it's decreasing and on the left it's increasing when sort of the costs are both the same at the extremities?
Oh, so when we see increasing, decreasing, we're talking about the size of the in which direction the curve is going. So here there's decreasing cost because the cost per unit is decreasing as we're becoming more productive. So there is increasing productivity and decreasing cost per unit. Here, that's the minimum. So the best place I can have, the place where my cost per unit is the lowest, and then there's increasing costs and decreasing return.
Okay, so it's like describing the curve, not necessarily like the points on the curve.
Yes, exactly. I'm describing what happens when I increase from Q0, Q1, Q1 to QM, QN, Q to Q10. I don't know. So yeah, I'm describing where I'm going on the curve. So this I already talked about this. So no short run curve can fall below the long run curve. That's obvious because if I could produce something super cheap in the short run, then I could obviously produce exactly that cost in the long term as well. So if I adjust everything, it's always at least as well as being able to adjust only one thing. Yeah, so that's, yeah. If I can adjust our inputs, I can always do at least as well as if I can adjust only a variable input. I don't know if I can. Yeah, that's nice. I can have bolts. Yeah. So of course, if I'm able to adjust machines and workers, then there's no way that I cannot be at least as well as if I can only adjust workers, for instance. All right. So yeah, tangent. What does tangent mean? tangent. I would say barely touching. So yeah, those points there. Oh yeah, so it's short run average total cost. Now I remember. Long run average cost. Yeah, so that. And that's tangent, that's opposite to some other concept that you may have heard or seen. So that if you see something like this, that would be not tangent, but secant. So tangent is this, secant is this. So you touch at 2 points, basically. Yeah. And why is it that that it's the point where the quantity of the fixed factor is optimal? Well, as I was saying, imagine that I decided to produce 1,000. Then it means that I'm at this point at the long run average cost curve. And of course, I've decided to choose the optimal number of workers to work with the specific number of machines. And it's not going to be tangent when I want to use too few workers or too many workers for the amount of machines I have. But if I'm happy with the choice I made 10 years ago in terms of size of restaurants or size of firm, then I'm not changing anything, and then the two curves touch. All right. So this would mean that the long run same as long run plan. So since it's the same as the long run plan, then I'm happy with it. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, because you said if we, let's say we add more employees, then it won't be tangent anymore. But this is for if on the short run, but if we add, is it possible to add more employees in the long run?
Yes, I could decide, if I decide that my best restaurant is not this size, but that size, for instance, then and I plan in the next 5 years, I'm going to add 2 more machines and hire 4 more people. So both increase the number of employees and machines and be here. And now if 5 years in the future, I realize, oh, well, I planned well, that's exactly what I needed. Then my plan is here and I don't have any reason to change. Then the 2 are going to be, so right now I'm going to be here and it's going to be like the plan I had. Yes. All right. Very long run, changes in technology. So, so we say that the long run, there's only one thing that you cannot change is the technology. You can adjust the number of machines, workers, but you're stuck with the same technology you have. The only way to even magically change the size of this long run average cost curve there is to have different technology. So we say better technology. Yeah, changing available techniques and resources. So these shift the long run average cost curve. By the way, do you think it's going to shift up or shift down?
If technology increases, it would shift up.
Shift up, okay. So that means that if I have better technology, it costs me more per unit.
Oh no, never mind.
Yeah, so that's so yeah. So most likely shift down. Since we tend to make technological progress. That allows to produce lower cost. So technological change is any change in the available technique of production. So we're not saying anything. It's like a black box. This is the engineers see what's available to us, then economists or a firm manager, they decide then what to do with it. All right, so we use the notion of productivity to describe how much production we're able to have for a certain given amount of inputs. Yeah, output produced per unit for some input. So 2 IDUs are, oh, what the, sorry about that. It's not output per work, output per worker. And output per hour of work. Yeah. Output per work, I don't know what it is. It's mostly the same, I would say. Output per units of work done, but it's yeah.
In the last slide, you said most likely shift down since what?
Since we tend to make technological progress that allow us to produce at lower cost. So if I invent a better battery, then let's say a better, better anything. So a better machine to extract aluminum, for instance, then I need fewer workers, and then I can produce my aluminum at a much lower cost than I could before. So it means that my long run average cost curve is going to shift down. So yeah, I'm not going to draw it, but yeah. Yeah, so innovating new products is done by firms in search of profit. It's done by scientists too. So the vaccines, for instance, we say, oh, Pfizer and Moderna, they're so nice, they're great companies, and they are, of course, but it's not like they started from scratch. Much of the work that was done for in developing RNA vaccines was done by scientists before them. So they take advantage of all the research that's done by scientists, and oftentimes financed by public organisms, so by taxes, by our own money. So yeah, we say that firms do the final step to put everything together, but they are taking advantage of much of the fundamental research that's done by other people too. Yeah, but still we can say yes. So that technological change is endogenous in the sense that they have to set aside money to produce new drugs, for instance, and inventing new drugs costs a lot of money still. So new techniques, improved inputs, and new products. So this is a better final product, better techniques of production, and better inputs. So for instance, more qualified workers. Yeah, so if an input increases in cost, then firm can either substitute away or innovate away from the input, or do both over different time horizons. So a good example I would say is oil. So before these. Oil was cheap. Then steady or sometime rapid. Increase in price. So more fuel efficient car. And now we have electric cars. So electric cars would never be, oops. What happened? I hope I didn't lose what oh yeah. So electric cars would never make sense if oil was very, very cheap. So they start making sense when it costs $1.50 at the pump to put gas in your car. So then it starts becoming so expensive to put gas that consumers say, okay, I'm going to. It makes sense to have over time to maybe my electric car costs me a bit more now, but at least it costs less in the long term. And yeah, do I still have? Yeah, so just few slides. Oh yeah, so I was curious what they were saying in the book. So why do they say that the economics is a dismal science? Because grim prediction. Yeah. But yeah, so we're over time. So yeah, let us finish talking about this here next time. And we're going to do the appendix and then start the next chapter.
Professor,
Yeah.
What does grim mean?
Grim is mean ominous. Like I don't know. I don't have a
Est-ce que vous pouvez le
Oui.
traduire en français? si possible?
lugubre.
Ah, ok. Merci.
Not optimistic. So I'm going to talk a bit more about this when we start next class. All right. So sorry for running as usual, but we have so many slides to get over with, and yeah, it's just so much material. And then the appendix is a lot of stuff too. So I wanted to at least finish chapter 8 before we start the appendix. Okay, so thanks everyone, and I see you next time.
See you, sir.
Have a good one.
See you.
Sir, I have a question
could-
about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask if we could still ask the question a few minutes after the class.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so can you go back to the slide with like the graph with the LRAC?
This one?
Any of?
Yeah,
those?
it's
There were a lot.
15 slides. It's just the same graph all the time.
Okay, so in that curve, does the cost of like developing the new technology is like always considered in that curve?
No, not at all. So the cost of developing the technology is something that's the very long run. So here, this is the long run. So 5-10 years, but the
We
new
don't see
technology
anything.
is see now?
Yep.
So
But like you
yeah.
said that like in the very long run, the curve would shift down because it costs less. But if you add the cost that it took you to like get there, then the curve would shift up, no?
That's a super good question, actually. So it's such a dynamic thing. I would say that it's so this what you're describing, say, is what is the optimal pace of technical innovation? Like, should I set aside 10% of my budget in research and development so that 30 years down the road, then I'm the leader and technological leader in that field, for instance?
Mhm.
It's not an easy question to answer. And I would say the best models would be, so this somehow describes something that's relatively static. So best model would be dynamic models like growth models. So there's the solo model that just describes capital accumulation over time, but then you add, it's all, Paul Romer has done a lot of work on that. So you're going to see all of this later in macro classes that describe dynamic models. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, so I'll just stop here and come back in a few minutes. See you soon.